After 12 years of marriage, my wife turned cold and distant. I hired a PL and found out she was sleeping with a married man. I sent every piece of evidence to her family, her office, and his wife. What his wife did next, even I didn't see coming. 12 years into our marriage, and I'm sitting here in my Upper West Side penthouse wondering when exactly the temperature dropped in my own damn house. My name is Marcus Hale, and if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you I had it all figured out. Successful legal tech startup that I built from nothing, beautiful wife, 2 amazing kids, and enough Macallan 25 in my bar cart to make even the most pretentious hedge fund bros jealous. But here's the thing about having it all figured out. Life has a sick sense of humor and loves to remind you that you don't know jack shit. I run LegalFlow AI, a machine learning SaaS platform that helps law firms identify risk in contracts faster than any associate pulling all-nighters in some glass tower. We've gone from Series A to Series B funding with some seriously smart venture capital partners who understand that legal tech isn't just the future, it's the present, and we're crushing it. Our AI can spot compliance issues, flag problematic clauses, and basically do what takes a team of lawyers weeks to accomplish. We're talking about disrupting an industry worth billions, and every major law firm from big law to boutique litigation shops wants a piece of what we're building. But success in Silicon Valley and success at home? Turns out those are two completely different algorithms, and I was about to get a masterclass in debugging the most important code of my life. Sienna, my wife, works as a luxury realtor, or at least that's what her business cards say. She specializes in Upper East Side penthouses, Tribeca lofts, and basically any property where the asking price starts with at least 7 figures. Smart woman, gorgeous, the kind of person who can walk into a room and immediately assess who's worth talking to and who's just taking up oxygen. When we met at a charity gala 12 years ago, she was wearing this knockout designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, and I was this cocky law school graduate who'd just landed my first job at a big firm and thought I was hot shit because I could afford a BMW. We clicked immediately. She got my ambition, I got her drive, and we both understood that in New York, you're either moving up or moving out. We built something together, this life that looked perfect from the outside. The penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, marble floors that echoed when our kids ran through the halls in their socks, a kitchen island bigger than most studio apartments where we'd have family breakfasts on Sunday mornings. Our kids, Aria and Oscar, are the best parts of both of us. Aria's 10 and has this artistic soul that reminds me why I work so hard. She'll disappear for hours with her paints and emerge with these incredible pieces that we frame and hang throughout the house. Oscar's 7 and leaves Lego creations on literally every surface available, including the stairs, which I've learned the hard way are basically tiny plastic landmines when you're heading down for a late-night glass of water. They're good kids, smart kids, the kind who still think their dad hung the moon and their mom is the most beautiful woman in the world. Which is why what happened next hit me like a hostile takeover I never saw coming. It started with small things. The kind of details that, in my line of work, you learn to pay attention to. In the legal tech space, pattern recognition isn't just useful, it's survival. 1 data point is noise, 2 is coincidence, 3 starts to look like a trend, and 4 means you better start documenting everything because you're probably looking at a systemic issue. Sienna started sleeping on the edge of our king-size bed, as far from me as possible without actually moving to the guest room. Her phone, which used to sit casually on her nightstand, now lived face down next to her at all times. Her calendar, which had always been an open book of client meetings and property showings, suddenly filled up with vague entries like networking event and client development that never seemed to correlate with actual listings or sales. The late showings became more frequent. Now, I get it. Luxury real estate isn't exactly a 9-to-5 business. Rich people want to see penthouses when they want to see them, and if some billionaire's schedule only allows for an 8 p.m. viewing, you make it work. But these weren't corresponding with anything in the MLS system, and trust me, I know how to run due diligence on just about anything. I kept my voice calm. The same tone I use in board meetings when our investors are getting antsy about our burn rate or when potential clients are pushing back on our pricing model. You okay? I asked one night, pouring myself 2 fingers of that Macallan 25, The good stuff I save for closing deals or celebrating product launches. She was standing by our bedroom window, looking out at the city lights like she was trying to solve some complicated equation. "Just tired," she said, turning to give me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you'd give to a client when you're trying to close a deal you're not entirely confident about. Technically correct, but missing that spark of genuine enthusiasm. But here's what really got my attention. The small tells that any good compliance officer would flag in a heartbeat. The new Tom Ford dress that appeared in her closet without any discussion about the purchase. The different perfume that replaced the Chanel she'd worn for years. The yoga classes that apparently took place at times when the studio wasn't even open, according to their own website. The way she'd angle her phone away when texting, like she was protecting sensitive financial information from potential insider trading violations. I'm not a paranoid guy by nature. In the startup world, paranoia will kill you faster than poor product market fit. But I am methodical, and I believe in data-driven decision-making. When our AI flags potential issues in legal documents, we don't ignore those warnings just because they're inconvenient. We investigate, we gather more information, and we make decisions based on evidence rather than assumptions. Standing there in our penthouse, watching my wife of 12 years give me corporate speak responses to simple questions about her day, I felt like I was looking at a contract breach I couldn't yet name, but could definitely audit. The change in our relationship felt as stark and measurable as a drop in our company's stock price or a sudden shift in our customer acquisition costs. The kids noticed too, in that way children do when the adults in their lives think they're being subtle. Arya started painting darker colors, and Oscar's Lego structures became more complex, like he was building fortresses instead of spaceships. They'd ask me why Mom was always on the phone, why she missed Oscar's soccer game, why our family dinners became increasingly quiet affairs where the only sounds were silverware against plates and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic. I realized I was conducting a risk assessment on my own marriage, the same way I'd evaluate a potential acquisition target or analyze a new market entry strategy. The metrics were all wrong. The key performance indicators were trending downward, and every instinct I developed as a CEO was telling me that something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of our relationship. So I did what any good executive does when facing an uncertain situation with potentially significant downside risk. I started gathering data, documenting patterns, and preparing for multiple scenarios. Because if there's one thing I've learned in both business and life, it's that hope is not a strategy, and when the temperature drops this dramatically, you better figure out why before everything freezes over completely. The city lights twinkled below us like a massive circuit board, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to debug the most important system of my life. I live by 3 simple principles that have made me a fortune and kept me sane in an industry where both are hard to come by: clean contracts, clear data, and tight compliance. At Legal Flow AI, our entire product philosophy revolves around pattern recognition, teaching machines to spot the stuff that human eyes miss, the subtle anomalies that could cost a law firm millions in malpractice suits or compliance violations. Turns out, those same skills that made us the darling of Series B investors and got us featured on the cover of TechCrunch work just as well when you're trying to figure out why your wife of 12 years suddenly acts like she's running a CIA operation out of your own penthouse. The beautiful irony? I was literally building software designed to flag risk in legal documents while completely missing the red flags in my own marriage. But once I started paying attention, really paying attention, like a forensic accountant diving into offshore accounts, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Let me paint you a picture of how a tech CEO approaches domestic surveillance, because it's probably not what you'd expect. I didn't hire some sketchy PI right off the bat or start following Sienna around like some jealous psychopath in a bad Netflix thriller. No, I approached this like any other business intelligence challenge, methodically, systematically, and with the kind of attention to detail that would make our compliance officer proud. First, the mileage discrepancy. Sienna drives a white BMW X7, her client car, she calls it, because apparently nothing says, "Trust me with your real estate portfolio," quite like German engineering and a 6-figure price tag. The thing about luxury cars is they come with all sorts of fancy tracking features that most people ignore. Weekly mileage reports, GPS breadcrumbs, fuel efficiency analytics. It's like having a corporate fleet management system built into your family vehicle. So when Sienna told me she was showing a penthouse in Soho to some hedge fund hotshot, I did what any reasonable husband would do. I checked the data. According to her story, she drove from our place on the Upper West Side down to Spring Street, then back home. Should have been maybe 30 miles, round trip, in city traffic. The car's computer logged 67 miles that day. Now, I'm not exactly a geography major, but last I checked, Soho hadn't moved to fucking Connecticut. Then there were the credit card charges. We've got everything linked to a shared American Express Black Card. Not because we're flashy assholes. Okay, maybe a little. But because the rewards program is legitimately insane when you're spending the kind of money we drop on everything from business dinners to Area's art supplies. The monthly statements read like a roadmap of our lives. Groceries at Whole Foods, gas stations, Oscar's school lunch account, the usual suspects. But mixed in with the normal family expenses, I started seeing charges that didn't fit the pattern. An $847 dinner at some boutique hotel bar in Tribeca at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The same night Sienna claimed she was home with a migraine, sleeping off what she said was a brutal day of back-to-back client meetings. A $340 charge at a lingerie boutique I'd never heard of for items that definitely weren't making appearances in our bedroom. Parking garage fees in Brooklyn Heights, a neighborhood where we don't know a single soul and where Sienna's brokerage doesn't have any listings. The beauty of modern technology is that everything leaves a digital footprint. Our family calendar runs through iCloud, synced across all our devices, because coordination is key when you're managing 2 kids, 2 careers, and a social calendar that would make most Fortune 500 CEOs jealous. I wasn't spying. This wasn't some covert NSA operation. I was just looking at data that was already shared between us, information that should have been transparent anyway. That's when the real inconsistencies started jumping out like compiler errors in bad code. Sienna would mark open house, Midtown, on the calendar, but when I cross-referenced those dates with the MLS database, yes, I have access, because knowing the real estate market is crucial for any startup CEO thinking about expansion. There were no open houses scheduled in Midtown on those days. None. Zip. 0 listings that matched her supposed schedule. The mentoring lunch with law school friend entries were particularly interesting, mainly because this mysterious friend didn't seem to exist anywhere in the digital universe. No LinkedIn profile, no mutual connections, no trace in any of the law school alumni directories I could access. For someone supposedly successful enough to warrant mentoring sessions at $200 per plate restaurants, this person had managed to maintain a remarkably low profile. I started keeping a leather notebook, old school, analog, the kind of thing that would never show up in any cloud backup or email thread. Every inconsistency, every anomaly, every data point that didn't align with the official narrative. Date, time, location, supporting evidence. I approached it like documenting product incidents at the startup, methodical, thorough, and emotionally detached. Because here's the thing about being a CEO. You learn to separate your personal feelings from the data in front of you. When our customer acquisition costs suddenly spike or our churn rate jumps, I don't take it personally. I look at the metrics, identify the root cause, and develop a strategy to address the problem. Same principle applies to marriage, apparently. The pattern that really sealed it for me was the phone behavior. Sienna had always been pretty casual about her device, leaving it on counters, asking me to answer texts while she was driving, the normal stuff you do when you've got nothing to hide. But suddenly, that phone became attached to her like it was a life support system. Face down on every surface, password protection that got updated mysteriously, and this new habit of walking into other rooms to take calls. Look, I'm not some naive startup founder who thinks the world revolves around him. I understand that people need privacy, that relationships require individual space, that not every conversation needs to be a joint venture. But when someone's communication patterns shift this dramatically, this quickly, any decent risk management protocol would flag it for further investigation. The final piece of the puzzle came from our own product. LegalFlow AI has this feature that analyzes communication patterns in legal documents. Looking for inconsistencies in tone, unusual phrasing, signs that multiple people might be drafting what appears to be single-author content. We built it to help law firms spot document fraud and ghostwriting issues. One night, While Sienna was upstairs giving the kids their baths, I noticed her laptop open on the kitchen island. Just sitting there, email client visible, like she'd stepped away mid-sentence. And there, in the draft folder, was an email to someone named B, with a subject line that read, "Tonight's plans changed." The writing style was completely different from her usual emails. Shorter sentences, different punctuation patterns, casual abbreviations she never used in professional correspondence. It was like reading a document that had been edited by someone else, someone who wrote the way they spoke rather than the way they conducted business. That's when I knew I wasn't looking at a phase or a rough patch or some temporary stress response to market conditions. This was a systematic operational change, a fundamental shift in how my wife was running her life. And just like any other business intelligence challenge, it was time to gather more comprehensive data before making any strategic decisions. Because in my experience, when the small clues start forming big patterns, you're usually looking at something a lot more significant than a minor compliance issue. When the quiet in our penthouse turned heavy enough to suffocate, I made a decision that would have made my general counsel shit a brick if she knew. I hired a private investigator. Not because I'm some paranoid asshole who gets off on surveillance. Trust me, I've got better ways to spend my time and money, but because I needed documentation that would hold up in court if this whole situation went sideways. And in my experience, when patterns this clear start emerging, going sideways isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. Finding the right PI in Manhattan is like finding the right venture capitalist. Everyone claims they're the best. Half of them are full of shit, and the other half charge fees that would make a big law partner blush. I needed someone with serious credentials, someone who understood that discretion wasn't just preferred. It was absolutely fucking essential. The last thing I needed was some wannabe detective screwing up what could potentially become evidence in custody proceedings. Leon Park came recommended through channels I can't exactly advertise on LinkedIn. Ex-NYPD detective, 23 years on the force, now running a boutique investigative firm that specializes in what they diplomatically call matrimonial intelligence. His office was in a nondescript building in Midtown, the kind of place that looks like it houses small accounting firms and insurance adjusters, which, I guess, wasn't entirely inaccurate. We met on a Tuesday afternoon. I came straight from a shareholder update meeting at our Series B Leads office, still wearing my Tom Ford charcoal suit and carrying my laptop bag like some kind of corporate armor. Leon looked exactly like Central Casting would order for experienced detective, salt and pepper beard, weathered face, the kind of steady eye contact that suggested he'd seen enough bullshit to fill several lifetimes. "You want confirmation or documentation?" he asked, cutting straight through the pleasantries. No small talk about the weather, no comments about my obviously expensive suit, no bullshit about how these situations are always difficult. Just business. Documentation, I said without hesitation. Something that a law firm partner and a family court judge can't ignore, can't dismiss, and can't explain away with creative legal interpretation. Leon nodded like I'd passed some kind of test. Timeline. Soon as possible, but clean. No corners cut. No questionable methods. Nothing that could get thrown out on procedural grounds or compromise any potential litigation. He quoted me a retainer that was roughly equivalent to what we paid our lead engineer for a month, plus expenses. In the startup world, that's what we call the cost of doing business. I wired the money before I left his office, because when you're dealing with potential intellectual property theft, and trust me, that's exactly what infidelity is, theft of shared emotional and financial assets, speed matters. Leon started surveillance the next day. Professional-grade equipment, multiple angles, the kind of comprehensive documentation that would make our compliance officer weep with joy. He tailed Sienna for 9 days, building what he called a comprehensive behavioral profile with supporting multimedia evidence. The first report arrived via encrypted email exactly 1 week later. Leon didn't fuck around with dramatic presentations or theatrical reveals. Just clean, organized data, timestamps, locations, photographic evidence, and a narrative summary that read like the world's most depressing quarterly earnings report. Brandon Pierce, CFO of Norland Build Group, a regional construction company that specialized in public sector projects and had been making noise about going public within the next 18 months. Married father of 2, lives in a Brooklyn Heights brownstone that probably cost more than most people see in a lifetime. drives a black Tesla Model S with vanity plates that read, Build One. Because apparently, even when you're cheating on your spouse, you can't resist a little corporate branding. The photos were comprehensive. Sienna entering the Grand Meridian Hotel in Tribeca at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. The same hotel where those mysterious credit card charges had been showing up. Brandon arriving separately 17 minutes later, parking that ridiculous Tesla in the same garage where we'd been seeing those unexplained fees. The two of them leaving together 3 hours later. And here's the kicker. Brandon's hand on the small of her back in exactly the same way I used to guide her through crowded charity galas back when we were actually happy. Leon included a detailed map of their pattern. Lunch meetings at upscale restaurants in neighborhoods that had nothing to do with either of their professional territories. Hotel entries and exits with coordinated timing that would have impressed a military logistics coordinator. And my personal favorite, a series of photos showing them kissing goodbye next to that black Tesla, captured with the kind of telephoto clarity that left absolutely zero room for alternative interpretation. But Leon didn't stop at the obvious stuff. This guy was thorough like a due diligence team preparing for an IPO. He'd researched Brandon's background, pulled his corporate filings, analyzed his social media presence, and even identified his wife Charlotte through LinkedIn and public property records. Charlotte Pierce, MBA from Wharton, former compliance officer at a major law firm, currently working as a partner at Harbor and Lane Capital, a private equity shop that specialized in infrastructure investments. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Here's Brandon, cheating on his wife with mine, and his wife turns out to be a private equity partner with the kind of financial expertise that could probably destroy his career with a few well-placed phone calls. It was like watching a corporate espionage thriller where everyone had access to nuclear weapons, but nobody realized it yet. Leon's report included financial analysis that would have impressed our CFO. Hotel receipts totaling over $8,000 in the past 6 months, restaurant charges that averaged $400 per encounter, parking fees that suggested regular patterns of behavior rather than spontaneous meetings. This wasn't some impulsive affair or momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained operation with clear budgetary implications and regular operational procedures. The timeline matched perfectly with the behavioral changes I'd been documenting. Sienna's first, late showing that didn't correspond to any actual real estate activity coincided exactly with Brandon's first appearance in Leon's surveillance logs. The new perfume, the updated wardrobe, the mysterious calendar entries, it all aligned with what was clearly a well-established relationship that had been running parallel to our marriage for months. Leon concluded his report with a recommendation that demonstrated exactly why I'd chosen him over cheaper alternatives. Subject appears to be operating under the assumption of operational security, but lacks professional surveillance awareness. Pattern suggests long-term commitment to current arrangement rather than exploratory behavior. Recommend client prepare for multiple scenario planning, including potential dissolution of marriage and custody arrangements. In other words, this wasn't going away on its own, and I needed to start thinking like a CEO, facing a hostile takeover rather than a husband hoping for reconciliation. I sat in my home office that night. Leon's report spread across my desk like quarterly financials from a failing subsidiary, sipping Macallan 25 and staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Brandon Pierce was probably heading home to Brooklyn Heights, kissing his wife Charlotte goodnight, and tucking his kids into bed, completely unaware that his entire world was about to change. Because here's the thing about documentation. Once it exists, it develops a life of its own. And Leon had just handed me enough evidence to blow up not just my marriage, but Brandon's entire carefully constructed corporate existence. I've built enough pitch decks in my career to know that presentation matters almost as much as content. Whether you're trying to convince venture capitalists to write a Series B check or attempting to demonstrate to a family court judge that your wife has been systematically defrauding the marital estate, the way you organize and present information can be the difference between success and getting laughed out of the room. So I did what any self-respecting CEO would do. I built a dossier that would have made Goldman Sachs' due diligence team weep with professional admiration. The document was a masterpiece of corporate organization. Executive summary on page 1, detailed timeline with supporting exhibits, financial analysis showing misuse of marital funds, and appendices containing photographic evidence that told the story better than any novelist could. I formatted it like a deal memo, because in many ways, that's exactly what it was, a comprehensive analysis of a failing business relationship that needed immediate restructuring or complete liquidation. But having killer documentation is only half the battle. In the legal world, just like in the startup ecosystem, execution depends entirely on having the right people in your corner. I needed a lawyer who understood both the emotional complexity of family law and the financial sophistication of high-net-worth divorces. Someone who could speak fluent MBA while also knowing how to navigate the particularly brutal dynamics of Manhattan matrimonial court. Priya Kapoor fit the bill perfectly. We'd known each other since law school, back when we were both grinding through constitutional law and corporate finance classes, fueled by cheap coffee and the kind of naive ambition that makes you think you can change the world through proper legal argumentation. After graduation, she'd gone the big law route for a few years before launching her own boutique litigation firm, specializing in complex matrimonial disputes for what the legal community politely calls high-asset individuals. Kapoor & Rhodes LLP operated out of a glass tower in Midtown that screamed expensive but understated, the kind of place where the lobby art costs more than most people's houses and the receptionist probably has an Ivy League degree. Priya's corner office overlooked Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made even my penthouse view look modest by comparison. She read through my dossier with the kind of focused intensity one usually reserved for quarterly board presentations or product launch strategies. Every few pages, she'd tap her fountain pen against a yellow legal pad, making notes in handwriting that probably cost more per word than most people's hourly wages. When she finally looked up after 45 minutes of complete silence, her expression was the legal equivalent of a venture capitalist who'd just discovered the next unicorn. "This is strong," she said, and coming from someone who'd handled divorces involving Fortune 500 CEOs and Saudi princes, that was basically the matrimonial law equivalent of getting featured on the cover of Forbes. Documented misuse of marital funds, clear evidence of adultery with supporting timestamps, comprehensive financial analysis showing systematic deception. Any competent family court judge would have trouble dismissing this level of documentation. But Priya wasn't just blowing sunshine up my ass. She leaned back in her chair, Italian leather that probably cost more than most people's cars, and gave me the kind of strategic analysis that reminded me why good lawyers bill more per hour than most people make in a month. "Here's what we're looking at," she continued, sliding her legal pad toward me. "New York is technically a no-fault divorce state, but judges still consider conduct when making determinations about asset distribution and custody arrangements. Your wife has been using marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship, which gives us leverage in negotiations and potential grounds for reimbursement." She warned me about the pitfalls with the kind of strategic thinking that would have impressed our Series B investors. No theatrics that could hurt the children's interests. No social media posts that could be construed as harassment. No direct confrontation that could escalate into something that damages your reputation or affects your company's valuation. You need to move like a Fortune 500 CEO handling a sensitive acquisition, clean, professional, and absolutely bulletproof from a legal perspective. The part about protecting the company hit particularly close to home. LegalFlow AI was in the middle of acquisition discussions with a smaller legal tech startup that had developed some innovative clause extraction algorithms. The kind of deal that could expand our market positioning significantly and potentially set us up for our own IPO within the next 2 years. The last thing I needed was personal drama that could spook investors or create regulatory complications. "What about the pending acquisition of that AI startup?" I asked. "We're supposed to close next month, and I can't afford any distraction that might affect due diligence or regulatory approval." Priya nodded like she'd been expecting exactly that question. "Guard your equity position religiously. Keep your stock options and founder shares completely segregated from any marital asset discussions. Make sure your corporate counsel documents everything properly, and don't let personal emotions compromise business judgment. The beauty of your prenup is that it should protect most of your corporate holdings, but we need to be surgical about how we handle this." She pulled up our prenuptial agreement on her computer. Apparently, she'd already reviewed it while I was building my dossier, and walked through the key provisions like a compliance officer explaining regulatory requirements. The document was solid, drafted back when I was just a law school graduate with more ambition than assets, but prescient enough to include language about business interests and intellectual property that would prove crucial now. The prenup protects your company equity and any appreciation in value, she explained, highlighting relevant sections. But we need to be careful about how marital funds were used to support business operations, and we need to document that her extramarital activities didn't compromise any of your professional relationships or business interests. I opened a fresh bank account that afternoon, a business account at JP Morgan Private Bank that would keep my assets completely separate from any ongoing marital financial entanglements. Every transaction documented, every transfer properly categorized, every financial move designed to withstand the kind of forensic accounting that comes standard in high-stakes matrimonial litigation. Priya had given me a roadmap, but she'd also given me something more valuable, perspective. "This isn't about revenge," she said as I was leaving her office, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind her like a corporate power fantasy. "This is about protecting your interests, your children's futures, and your company's trajectory. Emotion is the enemy of good strategy, and strategy is what wins complex litigation." Walking back to my Tesla in the underground parking garage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. Not the illusion of control that comes from hoping your problems will solve themselves, but the real thing, the kind of operational control that comes from having superior information, better legal representation, and a clear strategic plan. That night, I sat in my home office reviewing acquisition documents for the AI startup deal, sipping Macallan 25 and listening to Oscar practice piano in the living room. Aria was in her room, painting something that would probably end up framed in our hallway, and Sienna was at another mysterious client dinner that wouldn't show up in any MLS database. But for the first time in months, her absence didn't feel like a problem I couldn't solve. It felt like a business challenge I was finally equipped to handle. Sometimes the most devastating corporate moves look deceptively simple from the outside. A single press release announcing a hostile takeover. One regulatory filing that triggers a federal investigation. An email with the right attachments sent to the right people at exactly the right moment. The beauty of having spent 12 years building a legal tech company is that you learn to appreciate the elegant brutality of well-executed information warfare. And after weeks of methodical preparation, it was time to deploy the nuclear option. I crafted the email on a Sunday morning while Sienna was at another mysterious yoga class, and the kids were having breakfast with my parents in their Fifth Avenue apartment. Sitting in my home office with a cup of coffee and Leon's meticulously documented evidence spread across my desk like quarterly earnings reports, I composed what would probably be remembered as the most professionally devastating piece of correspondence since Theranos got exposed by that whistleblower. Subject line: "For your review, time-sensitive documentation." No dramatics, no emotional appeals, no all-caps bullshit that screams amateur hour and compromises credibility. Just the kind of corporate speak that suggests serious business requiring immediate attention. The body of the email was maybe 3 paragraphs, written in the same tone I'd use for a quarterly investor update or a regulatory compliance notification. Professional, factual, and absolutely devoid of personal commentary that could be construed as vindictive or emotionally compromised. Please find attached comprehensive documentation regarding activities that may impact multiple parties and business relationships. This information is being shared in the interest of transparency and to ensure all affected individuals have access to relevant facts for their decision-making processes. Given the potential implications for family welfare and professional obligations, I believe disclosure serves everyone's best interests. The recipient list was where the real strategy came into play. This wasn't some shotgun approach designed to cause maximum chaos. It was surgical, targeted, and calculated to create specific pressure points that would force the situation to resolve quickly and definitively. First on the list, Sienna's parents, Richard and Margaret Vance, who'd built their fortune in international finance and took family reputation more seriously than most people take their 401k contributions. These were people who'd spent decades cultivating relationships in Manhattan's social ecosystem, who served on charity boards and hosted fundraising galas where a single scandal could destroy years of careful networking. The kind of old money establishment types who understood that discretion wasn't just preferred, it was absolutely fucking essential for maintaining their position in society's power structure. Second, Sienna's sister Mara, who worked as a compliance officer at a major investment bank and would immediately understand both the legal implications and the professional ramifications. Mara had always been the pragmatic one in the family, the one who'd built her career on risk management and regulatory oversight. She'd take one look at Leon's documentation and start calculating potential damage to the family's business interests and social standing. Third, the compliance officer and managing partner at Sienna's real estate brokerage. This was the move that would have immediate professional consequences. Luxury real estate in Manhattan operates on reputation and referrals, and when your top producer is using company resources to facilitate an extramarital affair, that creates liability issues that go way beyond personal drama. Client trust, regulatory scrutiny, potential lawsuits, the kind of risk management nightmare that keeps corporate counsel awake at night. But the real masterstroke was the final recipient, Charlotte Pierce, Brandon's wife, located through the same kind of comprehensive research that Leon had used to build his surveillance reports. LinkedIn had revealed her position as a partner at Harbor and Lane Capital, a private equity firm with over $2 billion in assets under management. Public corporate filings showed her as a significant stakeholder in several infrastructure companies, including some that had business relationships with Brandon's construction firm. In other words, I wasn't just exposing an affair. I was potentially triggering a cascade of professional and financial consequences that could reshape entire corporate structures. The attachments were organized like a venture capital due diligence package: executive summary, detailed timeline, financial analysis, supporting photographic evidence, and comprehensive background research on all parties involved. Every document was labeled, cross-referenced, and formatted for maximum clarity and impact. I hit send at 11:47 a.m. on a Sunday, then poured myself 2 fingers of Macallan 25 and settled in to watch the fireworks. The response was immediate and spectacular. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing like a server farm during a DDoS attack. Sienna called first, 3 times in rapid succession before I decided to let it go to voicemail. Her messages were a fascinating evolution from confused to panicked to absolutely fucking furious, like listening to the 5 stages of grief compressed into a 15-minute time frame. Marcus, what the hell is this email? Call me back right now. I don't understand why you would send this without talking to me first. This is insane. You have completely lost your mind. Do you realize what you've done? Call me immediately. Richard Vance, Sienna's father, sent a text message that was pure corporate damage control. Received your documentation. Family meeting scheduled for this evening. Please confirm your availability. The man had built a fortune in international finance by staying calm under pressure, and even in crisis mode, he communicated like he was scheduling a board meeting. Margaret, Sienna's mother, went old school with a handwritten note delivered by messenger within 2 hours. The stationery was cream-colored with embossed letterhead. The kind of old money presentation that screams, "We've been wealthy for generations and know how to handle delicate situations." Her message was 3 sentences of perfectly calibrated disappointment. We are deeply concerned about the welfare of our grandchildren. This situation requires immediate family discussion. Please join us for dinner this evening at 7. Mara's response was pure compliance officer efficiency. A single text that read, "Holy shit, Marcus. We need to talk. Now, at least." Someone in that family understood the magnitude of what they were dealing with. But the most interesting response came from Charlotte Pierce. No hysterics, no angry phone calls, no emotional drama. Just a single email, sent 4 hours after my original message, that made me realize I'd potentially just allied myself with someone who played corporate chess at a level that would impress even our most sophisticated Series B investors. Mr. Hale, thank you for this comprehensive documentation. Your evidence fills several gaps in information I have been collecting independently. I believe we may have overlapping interests regarding resolution of this situation. I suggest we coordinate our approaches to ensure optimal outcomes for all affected parties, particularly the children involved. Please advise your availability for a brief conversation at your earliest convenience. Charlotte Pierce, Partner, Harbor and Lane Capital. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife and her corporate boyfriend anymore. I was looking at a potential strategic partnership with someone who had both the motivation and the resources to make Brandon's professional life extremely complicated. By evening, my phone had logged 37 missed calls, 18 text messages, and 12 emails from various combinations of family members, lawyers, and business associates who'd apparently been briefed on the situation. Sienna came home at 9:30 p.m. after what I assumed was an emergency strategy session with her family's legal team. Her face was the color of expensive paper, and her hands were shaking like she'd been mainlining espresso for 6 hours straight. "You humiliated me," she said, standing in our living room like she was delivering a prepared statement to hostile shareholders. "No," I replied, not looking up from the acquisition documents I was reviewing for our pending AI startup deal. "You did that." Sometimes the most devastating responses are the ones delivered in the calmest possible tone. 3 days after sending what I privately referred to as the email, Sienna's brokerage decided to host their annual awards ceremony at the Grand Meridian Ballroom, a $48,000 venue in Soho that screams, "We have more money than sense," with crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses and marble floors so polished you could use them as mirrors. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the same hotel where Leon had photographed Sienna and Brandon conducting their little romantic rendezvous. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so dark it makes startup failure stories look like children's bedtime tales. Sienna was scheduled to receive the Top Producer of the Year award. Apparently, facilitating affairs counts as customer service excellence in the luxury real estate world. The entire Manhattan real estate elite would be there. Managing partners from every major brokerage, compliance officers who control million-dollar listings, clients whose portfolios include more properties than most small towns. It was the kind of industry event where careers are made, deals are closed, and reputations can be destroyed with surgical precision. I hadn't planned to attend. Honestly, watching my wife accept accolades while knowing she'd been systematically defrauding our marriage felt about as appealing as sitting through a board meeting where investors explain why your burn rate is unsustainable. But then I realized this wasn't just a reward ceremony. It was a perfectly orchestrated opportunity to demonstrate that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve misusing company resources and violating the basic fiduciary duties that any decent compliance officer would recognize as grounds for immediate termination. So I did what any self-respecting CEO would do when presented with a strategic opportunity. I suited up and showed up looking like I owned the fucking place. I chose my Navy Tom Ford suit, the one I'd worn to close our Series B funding round, because sometimes you need armor that announces you're not here to play games. Paired it with Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent and a watch that could probably fund a small startup's MVP development. The goal wasn't ostentation, it was establishing credibility. In Manhattan's business ecosystem, how you present yourself determines how seriously people take whatever you're about to say. I arrived fashionably late, just as the cocktail hour was transitioning into the formal presentation. The ballroom looked like something out of Downton Abbey if the Crawley family had decided to go into commercial real estate. All crystal and gold leaf, with designer gowns that probably cost more than most people's cars and enough Armani suits to outfit a Fortune 500 board meeting. The first person I encountered was James Morrison, Sienna's managing partner, glad-handing near the bar like a senator working a fundraising gala. Morrison was old-school Manhattan real estate royalty, the kind of guy who'd been brokering 8-figure deals since before most of his competitors learned to spell fiduciary responsibility. We'd met at several industry events over the years, and he'd always struck me as someone who understood that reputation management wasn't just important. It was literally the foundation of sustainable business operations. "Marcus," he said, extending a hand like we were old college buddies rather than reluctant acquaintances. "Great to see you. Sienna mentioned you might not make it tonight." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching his corporate-friendly tone while sliding a sealed manila envelope from my jacket pocket. "Actually, I have some documentation that might be relevant to your compliance review processes. Thought it might be useful for your risk management team to examine." The envelope was labeled in neat corporate font, Re. Employee Conduct Review, time-sensitive materials. Inside was a condensed version of Leon's report, focused specifically on how Sienna had been using company resources, client relationships, and professional networking events to facilitate her extramarital activities. The kind of documentation that would make any competent compliance officer immediately start calculating potential liability exposure. Morrison took the envelope with the kind of practiced smile that senior executives use when they're not sure whether they're receiving good news or a lawsuit waiting to happen. "I'll make sure this gets to the appropriate personnel," he said, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. In an industry where client trust is everything and regulatory scrutiny can destroy decades of careful relationship building, any whiff of impropriety gets immediate attention from the risk management team. "Appreciate that," I said, then excused myself to grab a drink and watch the show. The formal presentation began exactly on schedule, with Morrison taking the stage like a CEO delivering quarterly earnings to nervous shareholders. He introduced the evening's honorees with the kind of corporate speak that manages to sound enthusiastic while revealing absolutely nothing of substance. Standard industry bullshit about excellence in client service and commitment to professional standards. Sienna was scheduled to be the evening's final honoree, the grand finale of professional achievement. But as Morrison worked through the preliminary awards, I noticed something interesting happening at the periphery of the event. Small clusters of conversation, discreet phone calls, the kind of hushed strategic discussions that happen when corporate executives realize they're potentially dealing with a regulatory compliance nightmare. About 10 minutes into the formal program, Morrison stepped away from the podium for what he announced as a brief intermission. I watched him walk directly to a corner table where the brokerage's general counsel and compliance officer were sitting with what looked like very serious expressions, and my manila envelopes spread between them like evidence in a corporate investigation. The intermission stretched longer than announced. Much longer. Long enough for whispers to start circulating through the crowd like insider trading rumors on Wall Street. Long enough for me to finish my Macallan 25 and order another. Long enough for several people to approach me with carefully worded questions about everything all right with Sienna and hope there's no family emergency. When Morrison finally returned to the podium, his corporate smile had developed some interesting stress cracks. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to some internal procedural matters that require immediate attention, we're going to modify this evening's program slightly. The Excellence in Client Relations Award will be presented at a future date, pending completion of our standard compliance review processes." Translation: Sienna's award had been suspended pending investigation into whether she'd been using client relationships to facilitate personal activities that could expose the company to liability claims. The silence in that ballroom was the kind of perfect quiet you get in board meetings when someone announces that the SEC has opened an investigation or that your biggest client just terminated their contract. Not angry silence, not shocked silence, but the professional quiet of people who understand that they're witnessing someone's career implode in real time. I didn't make a speech. I didn't gloat or provide commentary or do any of the dramatic bullshit that amateurs think makes for good television. I simply finished my drink, nodded politely to Morrison, and walked out of that ballroom with the same calm confidence I'd use after closing a successful acquisition deal. Outside, I slid into my black Tesla, the Model S Performance that I'd bought to celebrate our series of funding, and drove home up the West Side Highway. The city lights blurred past like data streams, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was operating from a position of strength rather than trying to solve problems with incomplete information. At home, I poured myself another Macallan 25, pulled up the board materials for our upcoming acquisition closing, and scheduled a session with Dr. Elise Mora, the family therapist who'd help me navigate the conversations I'd need to have with Aria and Oscar about why Mommy's work situation had suddenly become complicated. Sienna came home after midnight, and the rage in her voice could have powered our entire AI infrastructure for a week. "You humiliated me," she said, standing in our living room like a display CEO after a hostile takeover. "No," I replied, not looking up from the acquisition documents I was reviewing. "You did that." Sometimes the most devastating responses are delivered in the calmest possible tone. With Priya Kapoor leading our legal offensive like a general commanding a Fortune 500 merger, We filed papers that read like the most meticulously crafted acquisition documents I'd ever seen. No social media dramatics, no passive-aggressive Instagram posts, no amateur hour bullshit that screams emotional breakdown in progress. Just clean, surgical legal work that would make any big law partner weep with professional admiration. This was corporate warfare conducted at the highest possible level, and I was finally playing from a position of strength. The filing was a masterpiece of legal strategy: dissolution of marriage based on documented adultery, reimbursement for affair-related expenses charged to marital accounts, primary custody of both children with Sienna receiving structured visitation, and most importantly, protection of all my business interests including founder equity, stock options, and the pending acquisition deal. Priya had crafted language that would have impressed our Series B investors: comprehensive, bulletproof, and designed to withstand the kind of aggressive counter-litigation that comes standard in high-stakes matrimonial disputes. I kept our approach as clinical as a quarterly earnings report. No leaked information to gossip columnists, no strategic media campaigns, no attempts to turn this into some kind of public relations victory. Just methodical execution of a legal strategy designed to achieve specific, measurable outcomes while protecting the long-term interests of everyone involved. Especially Arya and Oscar, who didn't deserve to have their childhood turned into a corporate espionage thriller. The custody proposal was particularly strategic. We requested primary residence with me, structured visitation that prioritized the kids' school schedules and extracurricular activities, and shared decision-making authority for major life choices. Nothing punitive, nothing designed to completely eliminate Sienna from their lives, but everything structured to provide stability while ensuring that the parent who hadn't been systematically violating fiduciary duties would have primary responsibility for day-to-day decisions. Meanwhile, I had to manage the business implications of what was essentially a major life restructuring. Our board meeting was scheduled for the same week as our initial court hearing, and I couldn't afford to let personal drama compromise the company's trajectory. LegalFlow AI was tracking toward our best quarter yet, with customer acquisition costs down, churn rate at record lows, and the pending acquisition of that clause extraction startup moving through due diligence faster than anyone had expected. Diego Ramirez, our CFO, the good one, who hadn't been caught using company resources to facilitate extramarital activities, raised the obvious question during our quarterly review. Some of our private equity investors have been asking about potential distraction risk related to your personal situation, he said with the diplomatic tact that makes him worth every penny of his seven-figure compensation package. They want assurance that leadership focus remains on operational execution. I answered like the CEO. I trained myself to be over 12 years of building this company from nothing. Risk identified, assessed, and ring-fenced through appropriate legal counsel. All personal matters are being handled through established corporate governance procedures that maintain clear separation between individual and business interests. Company operations remain on plan, acquisition timeline unchanged, and management focus continues on achieving quarterly targets and strategic objectives. Translation: I had this handled like any other business challenge, and anyone who thought personal drama was going to compromise our company's performance could kindly go fuck themselves. The acquisition closing was particularly satisfying. We were purchasing NextClause AI, a small startup that had developed some innovative algorithms for contract risk scoring. Exactly the kind of complementary technology that could expand our market positioning and potentially set us up for our own IPO within 2 years. The founders were a husband and wife team from Stanford who'd built their company with the kind of methodical precision I respected, and they were looking for an exit that would let them focus on research while providing the resources to scale their technology. The deal closed on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that overlooked Central Park, with lawyers from both sides reviewing final documents while I sipped coffee and reviewed text updates from Priya about our court scheduling. There's something beautifully surreal about signing acquisition papers while simultaneously managing divorce litigation, like conducting 2 different orchestras playing completely different symphonies, but somehow maintaining perfect timing for both performances. Sienna's legal team tried to posture during our initial settlement conferences, which was about as effective as trying to negotiate with venture capitalists using emotional appeals instead of financial projections. Her attorney, some overpaid white shoe firm partner who probably charged more per hour than most people made in a month, attempted to characterize Leon's documentation as invasive surveillance conducted without proper consent. Priya's response was the legal equivalent of a perfectly executed hostile takeover. She slid the complete dossier across the conference table with the kind of hospital-quiet confidence that comes from having superior documentation and unassailable facts. Every photo time-stamped and authenticated, every financial transaction traced and verified, every hotel receipt cross-referenced with calendar entries and credit card statements. Your client systematically used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship over a period of 8 months. Priya said in the same tone I'd used to present quarterly financial results to skeptical board members. The documentation shows clear patterns of deception, misuse of shared resources, and breach of fiduciary duties that any family court judge will immediately recognize as grounds for asset reimbursement and consideration in custody determinations. The other attorney's face went through several interesting color changes as he reviewed the evidence, like watching someone realize their investment portfolio had just been wiped out by a market crash they hadn't seen coming. Numbers don't argue with emotions, and judges prefer facts over creative legal interpretations. We structured the settlement negotiations like a corporate acquisition: clear terms, measurable outcomes, and built-in compliance mechanisms that would ensure ongoing adherence to agreed-upon conditions. Sienna would receive structured support payments tied to her maintaining employment and meeting specific behavioral standards. I would retain primary custody with her receiving progressive visitation privileges contingent on successfully completing counseling requirements. All business interests remained completely protected under the prenup, with additional language ensuring that any future IPO or acquisition proceeds stayed ring-fenced from matrimonial considerations. The beautiful irony was that while I was methodically dismantling our marriage using the same strategic thinking that had built our company, Legal Flow AI was having its best quarter ever. Customer satisfaction scores were at record highs. Our AI was flagging contract risks with unprecedented accuracy, and we just signed a partnership agreement with a major law firm that would give us access to over 400 attorneys as potential customers. During one particularly productive day, I signed divorce papers in Priya's office at 10 a.m., then drove to our company headquarters for a board meeting where we approved the budget for next quarter's product development cycle. The cognitive whiplash was fascinating, going from discussing custody arrangements to reviewing machine learning algorithms, from calculating child support payments to analyzing customer acquisition metrics. That evening, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in our penthouse, looking out at Manhattan's glittering landscape while sipping Macallan 25 and reviewing board materials for our next investor update. Somewhere out there, Brandon Pierce was probably dealing with his own professional complications. Sienna was presumably explaining to her family why her real estate career had suddenly become complicated, and Charlotte Pierce was likely executing whatever corporate strategy she developed based on the information I provided. But in my home office, surrounded by evidence of a successfully restructured life and a thriving company, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the quiet satisfaction that comes from superior execution of a complex strategic plan. I expected silence from Charlotte Pierce, maybe some angry phone calls, possibly a strongly worded letter from her attorney, perhaps even a counter-investigation designed to build her own dossier of evidence for her inevitable divorce proceedings. What I did not expect was to witness the most elegantly executed corporate assassination I'd seen since that legendary hostile takeover of Revlon back in the 80s. Turns out, when you accidentally ally yourself with a private equity partner who has both the motivation and the resources to completely restructure someone's professional existence, you get a front-row seat to the kind of strategic warfare that makes Game of Thrones look like a children's birthday party. Charlotte Pierce wasn't just some cheated-on housewife drowning her sorrows in expensive wine and plotting revenge through social media posts. She was a Wharton MBA with 15 years of experience in private equity, a former compliance counsel at Sullivan and Cromwell who understood corporate governance like I understand machine learning algorithms, and this is the part that made me sit down when I found out: a general partner at Harbor and Lane Capital, a private equity shop managing over $2.3 billion in assets under management. More importantly, Harbor and Lane had a controlling stake in Norland Build Group, the construction company where Brandon Pierce served as CFO and thought he was hot shit because he drove a Tesla with vanity plates and could expense his affair-related hotel rooms to the company's client development budget. The beautiful irony was that my evidence hadn't just exposed an extramarital relationship. It had handed Charlotte the documentation she needed to trigger a morals clause buried deep in Brandon's employment contract. The same kind of for-cause termination provision that we standardize in every SaaS agreement, designed to protect companies from employees who create liability exposure through personal misconduct. I learned about Charlotte's corporate nuclear response the same way most people find out about hostile takeovers, through a carefully worded press release that appeared on Norland's website at exactly 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, timed perfectly to coincide with the opening bell and maximum media attention. Norland Build Group announces immediate leadership transition following comprehensive governance review. CFO Brandon Pierce has resigned his position effective immediately to pursue other opportunities. The company's board of directors has appointed interim financial leadership and confirms that all current projects and client relationships remain unaffected by this transition. Corporate speak translation: Brandon got fired so fast his head was probably still spinning, and they'd structured the announcement to minimize stock price volatility while making it clear that this wasn't some friendly departure with a generous severance package. But Charlotte didn't stop there. This woman had apparently been planning a comprehensive restructuring of Norland's operations for months, and my documentation had simply provided the final piece of evidence she needed to execute a strategy that would have impressed even our most sophisticated Series B investors. 2 hours after Brandon's resignation announcement, Harbor and Lane issued their own press release announcing a bolt-on acquisition of Meridian Construction, Norland's primary regional competitor, in a deal that had apparently been negotiated in complete secrecy over the past 6 months. The acquisition required immediate integration of management teams, operational procedures, and, most importantly, senior leadership positions that would eliminate redundancy and optimize efficiency. In other words, Charlotte had engineered a scenario where her husband's job wouldn't just be terminated. It would be completely eliminated through strategic consolidation. No potential wrongful termination lawsuit, no complicated severance negotiations, no messy litigation that could drag on for years. Just clean, surgical removal through legitimate business operations. The board meeting where this all went down must have been absolutely spectacular. I would have paid serious money to be a fly on the wall when Charlotte, composed in what I imagined was a perfectly tailored cream suit, calmly read Brandon's resignation letter into the corporate minutes, then immediately moved to approve the interim CFO appointment and ratify the acquisition terms that had been pre-negotiated through Harbor and Lane's investment committee. Brandon's corporate card was frozen by noon. His company email access was terminated 30 minutes later. Security escorted him from the building before lunch, carrying his personal belongings in a box like some cliché from every corporate drama ever filmed. But the really devastating part was what happened next. Charlotte, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking that makes private equity partners worth their obscene compensation packages, immediately initiated a comprehensive internal audit of Norland's expense policies, specifically focusing on client development, charges that might require review for compliance with IRS regulations and corporate governance standards. Translation: every hotel room, every expensive dinner, every suspicious charge that Brandon had run through company accounts during his 8-month affair was now subject to forensic accounting review by auditors whose job was to identify potential tax violations and securities fraud. Within 48 hours, Harbor and Lane's legal team had issued a litigation hold notice, preserving all electronic communications, financial records, and documentation related to Brandon's tenure as CFO. They'd also referred their findings to external counsel for review of potential claims related to breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of corporate assets, and violation of securities regulations that govern publicly traded construction companies. I got a single text message from Charlotte that evening. Situation handled. Recommend you focus on your children's welfare and your company's continued success. No further coordination necessary. The level of corporate efficiency was genuinely impressive. She'd eliminated her husband's career, protected her own professional reputation, secured her family's financial interests, and positioned Harbor and Lane for a strategic acquisition that would probably generate returns that made their other portfolio companies jealous, all while maintaining the kind of professional discretion that ensures nobody could accuse her of acting emotionally or vindicatively. Meanwhile, Norland's stock price actually went up following the leadership transition announcement, because apparently investors viewed Brandon's departure and the Meridian acquisition as positive developments that would strengthen the company's competitive position in the regional construction market. The merger announcement included a quote from Charlotte that was pure private equity poetry. This strategic combination creates enhanced value for all stakeholders while positioning the combined organization for sustainable growth in an increasingly competitive marketplace. We're confident that our strengthened leadership team and expanded operational capabilities will deliver superior results for clients, employees, and investors. No mention of personal drama, no hint of matrimonial complications, no suggestion that this was anything other than smart business strategy executed by sophisticated financial professionals who understand market dynamics and operational efficiency. I found myself genuinely impressed by Charlotte's execution. This was corporate warfare conducted at the highest possible level, with the kind of strategic sophistication that reminded me why private equity partners earn those ridiculous compensation packages. She'd turned personal betrayal into business opportunity, leveraged family crisis into portfolio optimization, and managed to completely destroy her husband's professional prospects while maintaining her own reputation as a competent fiduciary managing billions in investor capital. That night, I poured myself a glass of Macallan 25 and reviewed the quarterly reports from our own company while contemplating the elegant brutality of what I'd just witnessed. Charlotte Pierce had reminded me that the most devastating corporate moves often look deceptively simple from the outside. A few strategic decisions, some well-timed announcements, and suddenly someone's entire professional existence has been restructured beyond recognition. Somewhere in Brooklyn Heights, Brandon Pierce was probably sitting in his expensive brownstone, trying to explain to his children why Daddy wouldn't be going to work anymore, while also attempting to calculate how he was going to pay the mortgage on a house that was probably worth more than he'd ever earn again. The ripples from Charlotte's corporate nuclear strike spread through Manhattan's business ecosystem faster than insider trading rumors during earnings season. Within 72 hours, I was watching a masterclass in how interconnected the city's professional networks really are, and how quickly reputational damage can cascade through multiple industries when you fuck with the wrong person's family and financial interests. Sienna's real estate brokerage moved first, demonstrating the kind of risk management efficiency that comes from having compliance officers who actually understand fiduciary responsibility. Her Top Producer of the Year status was suspended pending internal review, which in corporate speak means we're calculating potential liability exposure and don't want our brand associated with whatever legal nightmare this might become. Her active client listings were quietly reassigned to other agents. Her business development responsibilities were redistributed, and her access to the company's million-dollar marketing budget was frozen faster than a startup Series B funding during a market correction. The managing partner, James Morrison, handled the transition with the kind of surgical precision that reminded me why his brokerage had survived 3 economic downturns and 2 federal investigations. No dramatic announcements, no public statements that could create additional legal exposure. Just quiet operational adjustments that protected the company's interests while making it clear that using corporate resources to facilitate extramarital relationships was not considered acceptable client development strategy. Meanwhile, Norland Build Group was executing the kind of post-acquisition integration that would have impressed our own M&A advisors. The merger with Meridian Construction created immediate synergies that eliminated redundant positions, streamlined operational procedures, and coincidentally made it impossible for Brandon to find employment anywhere in the regional construction industry. Harbor and Lane had essentially engineered a scenario where her husband's professional expertise had been consolidated out of existence through perfectly legitimate business operations. The press coverage was beautifully minimal. Just standard industry announcements about strategic combinations and leadership transitions, the kind of corporate communications that business reporters file without asking uncomfortable questions about personal motivations or family dynamics. Charlotte had managed to destroy her husband's career while generating positive coverage for her portfolio company's growth strategy. Our own company was thriving amid all this personal drama, which felt like the ultimate vindication of my strategic approach to crisis management. Legal Flow AI closed our Nextclause acquisition ahead of schedule, with integration proceeding smoother than anyone had projected. The combined AI capabilities gave us contract risk assessment features that were genuinely revolutionary. Machine learning algorithms that could flag potential compliance issues, identify problematic language, and predict litigation risk with accuracy rates that made traditional legal review processes look like amateur hour. Our Series B extension cleared final approval from all investor parties, providing additional runway that positioned us perfectly for the IPO discussions we'd been having with investment bankers from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. The timing was particularly satisfying. While my personal life was being restructured through sophisticated legal strategy, my professional life was achieving the kind of exponential growth that most startup founders only dream about. I maintained my parenting responsibilities with the same methodical attention to detail that I brought to product development cycles. Saturday mornings with Aria at the Metropolitan Museum, where she'd disappear into the contemporary art galleries and emerge with sketch ideas that ended up framed throughout our penthouse. Sunday afternoon soccer games with Oscar, whose Lego architectural projects had become increasingly sophisticated. The kid was basically designing scale models of Manhattan skyscrapers using plastic blocks and an intuitive understanding of structural engineering that would have impressed our building contractors. The divorce settlement negotiations concluded with the kind of efficiency that comes from having superior documentation and opposing counsel who understand when they're holding a losing hand. Sienna received structured support payments calibrated to her reduced earning capacity following her compliance issues, progressive visitation privileges that prioritized the kids' school schedules and therapy sessions, and absolutely zero access to any business interests protected under our prenuptial agreement. I kept the penthouse, the Tesla, the art collection, and most importantly, primary custody of 2 children who deserved stability more than they deserved front-row seats to their parents' strategic warfare. The settlement included provisions that prevented either party from discussing the case details publicly, which protected everyone's professional interests while ensuring that Aria and Oscar wouldn't have to see their family drama trending on social media or covered in gossip columns. The financial arrangements were particularly satisfying. All affair-related expenses charged to marital accounts would be reimbursed with interest calculated at prevailing market rates. Hotel rooms, restaurant charges, parking fees, that mysterious lingerie purchase. Every documented transaction would be repaid from Sienna's separate property, essentially forcing her to buy her own adultery at retail prices. Priya Kapoor had negotiated language that would have impressed our Series B legal counsel. Clean asset division, enforceable custody provisions, and built-in compliance mechanisms that made violation more expensive than adherence. The kind of contract structure that protects all parties while creating powerful incentives for continued good behavior. When Charlotte finally asked to meet, we chose neutral ground. The bar at the St. Regis, a location that suggested serious conversation between sophisticated professionals rather than dramatic confrontation between wounded spouses. She arrived wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that comes from successfully managing billions in investor capital while simultaneously orchestrating the complete professional destruction of someone who'd threatened her family's stability. To clean exits, she said, lifting a club soda with the same composure I'd used to toast a successful acquisition closing. And better governance, I replied, appreciating both her strategic execution and her understanding that this conversation was about operational efficiency rather than personal vendetta. We talked for exactly 37 minutes, comparing notes on legal strategies, discussing the intersection of personal and professional reputation management, and sharing perspectives on how to protect children from the collateral damage of adult strategic decisions. Charlotte had handled her situation with the same methodical precision I'd brought to mine. No emotional dramatics, no public relations campaigns, just surgical removal of problems through appropriate corporate channels. Harbor and Lane approved a new ethics policy across all portfolio companies. She mentioned as we were concluding our conversation. Your documentation helped inform the compliance framework we're implementing to prevent similar issues in the future. I smiled, not because I'd hurt anyone, but because comprehensive documentation and strategic thinking had generated positive systemic change. The same evidence that had protected my family's interests had also contributed to better corporate governance practices that would benefit thousands of employees across Charlotte's investment portfolio. Driving home in my Tesla, with Manhattan's lights streaming past like data visualizations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The quiet satisfaction that comes from superior execution of complex strategic challenges. My phone buzzed with a text from Aria. "Dad, finished the painting I was working on. Think you'll like this one." That's when I realized the most important measure of success wasn't stock prices or legal victories or even professional reputation. It was coming home to children who still believed their father could handle whatever problems life presented and being worthy of that trust. The divorce papers finalized on a Tuesday morning that felt more like closing an acquisition deal than ending a 12-year marriage. Judge Patricia Hartwell praised our parenting plan with the kind of professional appreciation usually reserved for well-structured corporate governance documents, noting that both parties had prioritized the children's welfare over personal grievances, which was basically legal speak for, "You two managed to act like adults instead of vindictive assholes." The custody arrangement worked like a Swiss watch. Aria and Oscar with me during the school week, structured weekend visits with Sienna, shared decision-making for major life choices, and built-in flexibility for holidays and special events. No drama, no power struggles, no weaponizing of parental authority for emotional leverage. Just clean operational procedures designed to provide stability while protecting everyone's long-term interests. LegalFlow AI shipped our new clause risk scoring feature exactly on schedule, integrating the algorithms we'd acquired from Nextclause into our existing platform like they'd been designed together from the beginning. The results were spectacular. Our AI could now identify potential contract vulnerabilities with 94% accuracy, flag compliance issues that human lawyers missed, and generate risk assessments that helped clients avoid litigation before problems developed. We were basically providing legal superpowers to law firms that understood technology was the future of their industry. The Morrison & Associates partnership turned out to be even more valuable than projected. 400 attorneys across 17 offices, all using our platform to review corporate contracts, merger agreements, and compliance documentation. They were generating more data points than we'd ever processed, teaching our machine. Learning algorithms to recognize patterns that would have taken years to develop through smaller client relationships. Our customer acquisition costs dropped to record lows, while retention rates climbed above anything we'd achieved in our company's history. Word-of-mouth referrals were generating sustainable organic growth, and we were signing enterprise clients faster than our onboarding team could process them. The kind of hockey stick trajectory that makes venture capitalists start calculating IPO valuations and exit strategies. I kept my personal life deliberately simple, focusing on what actually mattered instead of the performance theater that dominates too much of Manhattan's social ecosystem. Some evenings, I drive the Tesla down to the Hudson River and park where I could watch the lights reflect off the water, letting the city breathe around me while I reviewed board materials or planned weekend activities with the kids. Aria's painting had evolved into something genuinely impressive. Her latest series featured Manhattan cityscapes from unusual angles, fire escapes creating geometric patterns, shadows falling across sidewalks in ways that suggested movement and energy. We'd converted one of our spare bedrooms into a proper art studio, with north-facing windows and professional lighting that would have made gallery owners jealous. Oscar had progressed from random Lego structures to architectural projects that demonstrated serious spatial reasoning skills. His latest creation was a scale model of our building, complete with working elevator mechanisms and miniature Tesla in the parking garage. The kid understood engineering principles that some of our junior developers were still learning. I didn't chase rumors about what Sienna was doing with her newly restructured life. Word filtered back through Manhattan's interconnected gossip network that she'd taken a position with a smaller boutique firm, handling mid-market residential properties instead of the luxury listings that had defined her previous career. A venture capital partner from our Series B lead invited me to join a private jet trip to Palm Springs. where their portfolio companies were hosting a retreat designed to facilitate cross-pollination of ideas and potential partnerships. The kind of networking opportunity that usually results in strategic investments and business development deals worth 8 figures. I declined and took the kids to Coney Island instead. We rode the Cyclone until Oscar decided he was brave enough for the bigger roller coasters. 8 overpriced hot dogs that tasted better than anything served at $500 per plate charity galas, and played arcade games until Aria won enough tickets to claim a stuffed animal that she immediately named after our company's mascot. Simple pleasures that didn't require corporate positioning or strategic networking to generate genuine satisfaction. When the city got quiet, usually late Sunday evenings after the kids had gone to sleep, I could admit something I wouldn't have acknowledged 6 months earlier. I didn't just survive betrayal and corporate restructuring. I'd performed a comprehensive life optimization that protected my children, strengthened my company, and eliminated relationship dynamics that had been compromising operational efficiency for months. The truth was that love without honesty is exactly like a hostile takeover. It looks powerful from the outside, creates impressive short-term results, but internally it bleeds value faster than a startup with unsustainable burn rates and no clear path to profitability. I'd learned to distinguish between genuine partnership, the kind built on shared values, transparent communication, and mutual respect for fiduciary responsibilities, and elaborate performance theater designed to maintain appearances while pursuing individual agendas that undermined collective interests. Charlotte texted me one final update that perfectly captured the elegant resolution of our inadvertent strategic partnership. Harbor and Lane Board approved comprehensive new ethics policy across all portfolio holdings. Your documentation packet helped establish compliance standards that will prevent similar governance failures in our other investments. Thank you for the professional courtesy. I smiled reading that message, not because we'd hurt anyone, but because truth, once properly documented and strategically deployed, had accomplished what good governance always achieves. It changed behavior, improved operational standards, and created systems that prevent future compliance failures. The kids were asleep in their rooms, Aria probably dreaming about her next artistic project, and Oscar planning tomorrow's Lego construction. Our penthouse was quiet except for the distant hum of Manhattan traffic and the occasional notification from my phone showing customer engagement metrics from our latest product release. I poured one final glass of Macallan 25 and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that had witnessed the entire transformation, looking out at a city that rewards strategic thinking and punishes operational incompetence with equal efficiency. Sometimes the most important victories aren't celebrated with champagne and press releases. Sometimes success looks like a quiet Tuesday evening in a well-organized home, reviewing financial reports from a thriving company while your children sleep peacefully in the next room, knowing that you've built something sustainable based on honest communication and consistent execution rather than elaborate deception and performance theater. The city lights twinkled like data points in a perfectly optimized algorithm, and for the first time in over a year, everything was exactly where it should be.